Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the 11 Plus Exam Success Podcast. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about what the 11 Plus exam is, what kind of schools require it, what subjects are covered, when students should start their preparation, and best practices for preparation. The 11 Plus Exam Success Podcast is brought to you by Exam Bytes Academy. Exam Bytes Academy is your premier resource for the 11 Plus exam. Exam Bytes Academy's founders have more than 20 years of experience with the 11 Plus exam and have helped hundreds of students attend their dream secondary schools, including Eton College, City of London, both the boys and the girls schools, St. Olave's, Dartford, and Bexley Grammar Schools. Exam Bytes Academy offers practice papers, group lessons, individual lessons, and parent resources to help your child ace the exam. Exam Bytes focuses on teaching your children the fundamentals and theory to help students quickly reason through and solve questions with plenty of time to spare. An investment in your child's 11 plus exam preparation is an investment in a lifetime of success. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I am Ranjani Sundar, your host for today, and I am joined by my co-host, Ken Thirukkumar, the founder of Exam Bytes Academy, with, again, more than 20 years of experience with the 11 plus exam. I'll pass it off to him to tell you a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous intro. So my name is Ken, and I've been, as Ranjani has said, been working with children for more than 20 years. I'm a trained medic, and now I want to make sure that more children can have access to our teaching methods, our resources that have worked for me. So, just take it from the start. So, I've been working with children for more than 20 years to not only help them pass their exam, but try and exceed beyond that, often passing with flying colors and getting scholarships into private schools and grammar schools. And so with this podcast, what we want to do is make sure more parents have access to our teaching methods as well as our knowledge, because over the years, many parents have asked the same sorts of questions, and we realized that we need to help. We're not enough to help each person jump on a call and answer all those questions. And it gets difficult, and more people are left out than left in. So yeah, that's what we want to do here, and we hope you'll learn something from our podcast.
We're honored to have you join us today. I'm sure that all of the parents and the people listening out there will benefit a lot from the years of knowledge that you have to share with us. So thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, let's go ahead and start picking your brain, getting all of that information. Can you start by telling us just like a broad overview? I'm sure, when I first heard of the 11 plus exam, I didn't really have a good idea of what it was. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who maybe have a beginning to intermediate understanding. Can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly the exam is?
Absolutely. So the 11 plus, in its simplest form, is a selection process for grammar schools and private schools in the UK. There might be similar ones across the world if you're listening to this abroad. And at the end of the day, it's an IQ test of sorts. So it's there to help schools select kids with higher potential, not ability, but potential for improvement and potential for learning, and just so that they can choose the cream of the crop, so to speak.
So you mentioned it's an IQ exam. Usually, are children able to prepare for things like that, like IQ test, or is it something that is just based on the child's ability?
That's a really good question, and it is a question that pops up all the time. So when we say IQ test, it's not an IQ test in its traditional sense. So a general IQ test is given based on numbers and reasoning. So in this, on the other hand, it depends on the school or the school board and how they want to perform it or have it be performed. But it can be a number of subjects, one of 4 subjects or all 4 subjects. So that's maths, English, non-verbal reasoning, and verbal reasoning. And going back to your question, because I'm sure you'll pick me up on that, going back to your question, can it be prepared for? Absolutely. Because a lot of it comes from the child's ability to reason. And reasoning can be taught to a huge extent. I'm a huge believer of nurture versus nature, especially forming that, things can be taught and things can be learnt. Because, of course, no one was able to walk when they were born. You had to learn it. Weren't able to speak a language when you were born, right? So all of these things, all of these things can be taught, you can absolutely be taught to reason. And that's what I believe in, and that's what's worked for me, and that's what's worked for all our students who often come from, very little reasoning backgrounds. They haven't been taught reasoning in schools. I'm aware that in some schools they are taught reasoning. For the vast majority, schools don't teach reasoning. They're taught maths, English, and of course the humanities like geography, English, geography, history, and science, but not really reasoning in its truest sense. So of course it can be taught.
Amazing. I will definitely pick up on that in a little bit, but just to kind of round out, at least, the general understanding of the 11 plus exam, can you tell us a little bit more about like logistically how long the exam is, where they take it, how many exams they'll end up taking, stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so historically, it's been, like I said, one of four subjects, or two or four subjects, or four subjects. And when I mean that is they're usually paired up, and it depends on your school. So it can be maths and English, or verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning, or maths and non-verbal, English and verbal, or all four subjects. And like I said, historically, there have been a couple of subjects, but now increasingly they're doing two stages. So it might be multiple choice and then an in-person written subject. So the multiple choice is usually done at the center, on a computer for some schools, or on paper in some schools. The written papers are usually at the school, and you have to pass the first stage to get to the second stage. Now, I do want to say that's always dependent on your school, and it really, it's best to do your research and just all call up the school and see what their process is, because it does change year to year. They usually do announce it round about this time. So ask your school, ask the schools that you're researching, and see what they want, what they want to be tested. These tests are usually administered by teachers. The examiners are usually teachers. They know children. They've taught children for many years, so they know children, don't stay focused for exceedingly long amounts of time. However, they do want children who can stay focused for a normal amount of time. That can be an hour, and a bit more than an hour usually. So tests themselves rarely exceed an hour. So each test, or a maths test or an English test, might be an hour, but it's rarely more. And so if you were to have all four subjects in one time, they would give you breaks. So I know some schools, if it's early in the morning, they usually have shorter tests. So it might be half an hour per test, and then have a break in between two tests. Or if it's an hour-long test, they will have breaks in between, where you can get a snack, where you can bring, water bottles and drinks. So your children will be well rested. But of course, with regards to accommodations, that's a whole different thing, and we will talk about accommodations in the future, hopefully, with regard to or children who may need different sorts of accommodations, and we'll definitely touch on that later.
Great. So something that I'm hearing that's quite interesting is students, like in their journey to preparation, they not only have to master the subjects that are being tested, but they also have to build that sort of like stamina muscle, right? Like with up to 4 hours of examination, even with breaks in between, that's definitely something that stands out as, having that grit and the fortitude to persist, even when their brains are a little bit tired, and finding a way to rejuvenate themselves is something that's definitely standing out as a core part of preparation and just being ready for the exam.
Absolutely. I mean, this is no easy task. We say as adults, oh, it's only 4 hours, or 4 and a bit hours. But if you've sat through a meeting, you will know that it is a long time, right? Or if you've been doing any task for 4 hours, it's a long time. And these are children. They're usually 9, 10. I mean, when they're taking the test, they're 10 or 11. And that's a very small age. They might seem mature to you, but from first-hand experience and teaching children all these years, they are small, they're little, and it is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And that's why we want to make sure slowly and surely you build that up. If you sort of throw them into the deep end, sure, some might float, some might swim even, but for the vast majority, they will burn out. And this is bringing us onto another topic entirely, but preparation will help with this. You sort of start off with smaller papers, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and build it up. As you said, it's a wonderful point that you made. It is testing more than just aptitude, but also stamina, which, of course, in lessons, they want children who can focus and pay attention for long periods of time.
Mhm. We'll definitely talk a lot more about preparation in this video and future episodes. But before we jump into that, just to kind of round out a parent's understanding of the 11 plus exam, can we talk a little bit more about each of the subjects that are covered?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, if we were starting with maths, now, we'll start off with maths and English because they're core subjects that most parents and most schools cover if you're in the English-speaking world. And for the most part, while schools often say, we expect them to be around about year 5 curriculum, year 6 curriculum, and that's where we will be testing them. Sorry, I misspoke. Year 6 curriculum, rather. What the schools don't tell you is that they're often tested at the level of a school child who's at the end of year 6 rather than at the start of year 6, which is when they take the exam. So if your child is coming out of year 5, they're just 10 or just might have turned 11 over the summer, they are not prepared for things that would have been taught to them in a year's time. So that's where the major struggle comes, because they are technically a year behind when they're taking that test. So for maths, we say, to be on the safe side, that you are at the level of a year 7 student at the start of their year 7 journey, so in September. So we try and teach them to year 7, so start of secondary school, which is giving them an added benefit of when going into secondary school, they're already hitting the ground running. They already know some of the topics that are taught, and they can just keep building on top of that. So that's what we do for maths. For English, very similar. Again, they expect starting year 7 level, and that's usually split into 2 subjects. Now, I said 4 subjects at the start, so maths, English, non-verbal, verbal reasoning. But for English, there's a bit of a technical thing that we do have to go into, and that is English writing versus English comprehension. So comprehension is, as the name sounds, is all about understanding. It is not just about recall. So when it comes to understanding the text, they want to see, can the children understand what the author meant, what the characters are saying without being said. So, reading between the lines. And that's that's what they want to focus on. Can they understand the nuances? So that's comprehension, and of course communicate that to the reader. The writing, on the other hand, is all about communication. Can the candidates communicate their thoughts and ideas well as using techniques and good grammar, punctuation, spelling? And I will go into the nuances in a future episode, I suppose. But that's the overview for those 2 subjects. Now we get into the tricky part, which most parents might not know about: verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning. And this is where the reasoning really comes in. So verbal reasoning is very similar to English. It's all to do with words and letters and codes. So if you've ever done a crossword, or if you've ever done a word search, very similar skills are being used. If they say 4 down and it's a household animal, 3-letter word, it could be a dog or a cat, right? Or a rat even. And then they might give you further clues. So that's a particular question type. And they're made up of many, many different question types that might involve codes, where you are expected to break codes even. And it's all about trying to understand relationships between letters and reason through it using logic. Now, that can be based on cultural knowledge as well. So a major problem that children often have to overcome is understanding the vocabulary that is present. If your child uses simple words like happy, sad, glad, nice, they might not know words like ecstatic or amicable. And so that is another thing that they have to overcome. There's a lot of things that these students have to overcome when they're preparing for the 11 plus, and their work is cut out for them. But and then we go on to non-verbal reasoning. So non-verbal reasoning is, in my opinion, what most children find tricky, or the hardest rather, because it's completely novel to them. It's nothing to do with words, nothing to do with anything most of them have faced. It's all to do with shapes. And if you have done a Rubik's Cube before, very similar skills are being used there. So being able to rotate a shape in your head, being able to identify shapes, relationships, and being able to follow patterns. So what that tests is, can you logically reason with the given evidence? And that tells teachers and examiners a lot more than you think it does. So that's the sort of general overview. There are so many nuances to go into that, but of course, I think our host Ranjani wants to make sure we are covering a lot of things. But that's the general overview.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful. We will definitely be going into each of the individual subjects in way more detail in our future episodes. So make sure that you follow our podcast to stay tuned. But kind of following up on, you mentioned like there's a lot for these students to learn. Can we talk a little bit about, before we get into preparation and more on the schools, what exactly is the parent's responsibility when it comes to teaching things, and where does a tutor or additional resources come in?
Fantastic question. So just to start off with, was your first question, where did the parents' responsibility? Yeah. So, it really depends on where you are in the 11 plus journey. So some parents start off as soon as, they finish year 2, maybe even earlier. I know, bond books start from basically year 2, year 1, and go up further. So it's a tricky topic to discuss, especially because not every parent is time rich. And when I mean time rich, when you have a lot of time available to dedicate to your children. So it depends, and there is no right or wrong way to go about preparing when it comes to the 11 plus, when it comes to the parents themselves. But I would say making sure your children are reading from a very young age, and if they haven't started, start now. Making sure the books are age appropriate, so that means no reading simple books if they are if they are comfortably reading at their age level. Try to challenge them a bit, right? Don't let them get away with reading simple books. Try to get them to develop their vocabulary. And when it comes to reading, to build on top of that, we always hear tutors go on about reading the classics, so things like Oliver Twist or Watership Down, things like that, or any of those books. It is a challenge for a lot of children because it's not in their interest. And what we say is, a little is better than none. So maybe get them to read a chapter of it, discuss it with them, make it an interactive activity rather than a solo activity, so that they know you are also in it with them. Try not to make them feel alone. Okay, because the biggest thing you can do to support your child is to make sure they don't feel alone. Because like I said, they're still children. For all they know, they're alone in this together. They're all alone in this, not together. So make sure they know you're there to support them, not just, through resources, but also through attention and through care. Because they're your baby, right? You want to make sure you support them just like you did when they were born. But yes, so that's the starting thing for English. For maths, making sure that they're comfortable with their mental maths. So that's addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. Definitely make sure they know their times tables. If not until 15, up at least until 12 times tables. Now, the more the better, but you don't need to be obsessive about it. And as long as they're comfortable doing, double-digit calculations in their head when it comes to addition, addition, subtraction, then it can be built on once they get into year 5. We usually recommend year 5 onwards is when when you start taking it seriously. So up until then, make sure that their foundations are really well built. So that's maths and English. Verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning can be taught. So all of these can be taught to reason, but if your foundations aren't there, that house you're building won't be stable. So that's usually what we recommend.
Okay, and so you gave a lot of actionable advice for parents on how they can, foster a better vocabulary in their children early on through reading books of their interests that are at an appropriate age level for them to continue building on their knowledge. And then second, you talked about how students need to build the fundamentals in math, especially when it comes to mental math. and just understanding basic arithmetic and just having a really good grasp of that. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, in the pre-serious stages before the
Mhm.
student enters year 5, what they can do to start building that natural reasoning muscle that's needed for subjects like verbal reasoning and nonverbal reasoning that tend to be the hardest for them to kind of get on board with?
In that stage, so this is when we are talking year 4 and below, we would recommend doing puzzles. And puzzles are a fantastic way of building that reasoning muscle, because all you're doing is going, okay, what actually works? So if you think about it, when children are very little, you sort of give them the circle peg and the circle, those slots, and you try and fit them into shapes. That's exactly what we want to build, but at a higher level. So instead of going, the circle shape goes into the circle hole, or the square peg goes into the square hole, we want to go, okay, let's focus more on things like crosswords or word searches, because that's all teaching them reasoning skills. And a huge part of the 11 plus is speed. But without technique, speed doesn't really work. If you're doing something wrong and you do it fast, it doesn't really matter, right? So we want to make sure that when children come to us, they have a solid understanding of how to do things properly, how to reason properly. Okay, so that includes crosswords, word searches, and any sort of word puzzles are really, really good. And that's a sort of very basic thing. There are numerous other things that you can do, including shapes and Rubik's cubes and chess are all wonderful things. But not everyone has the time for that, and not every child is interested in chess or Rubik's cubes. But for the most part, you want to make sure in that pre-serious stage, you are catering to your child's interests, and while also building their skills.
Okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Um, can you talk a little bit more about so you talked a little bit more about like the preparation that you recommend in the pre stages. Let's say my
Mhm.
child is in year 5. I am just listening to this podcast for the first time, just starting to learn about the 11 plus. What do I do from here? How do I help my child succeed in the 11 plus exam?
Okay, well, if you're at that stage right now, I do want to say, congratulations and commiserations for joining this journey. It is a long journey, it's a long year, and as many of the parents have said to me, and as my own mum and dad have said to me, it is a long, long journey. It's a hard journey, but it is worth it in the end. So that's what I would say at the start. But if you're at that stage, first of all, I would start researching the schools that you want your child to get into, and that you want to apply for. Because when you are applying for schools, you would have to sort of put their names down pretty soon. So you want to get an idea of what sort of schools, speak to parents, other parents who their children are in those schools, go to open days. There are multiple open days. You can go early as well. You don't have to wait until they're year 6 or year 5. You can go earlier. You can call up the school, ask for a private open day. Some of them do offer that. That's just to do with the schools. When it comes to the 11 plus preparation, I would say it really depends on how much time you have as a parent. If you have lots of time and you have you feel very confident with preparation and helping a child, then of course, you probably might not need a tutor, because the 11 plus is absolutely teachable, and you can teach a child how to do it through papers alone. And yeah, so that's one thing you can do. However, if you don't have time, or you have multiple children, you might not have the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. So hiring a tutor would be quite advisable in that situation, especially if you don't have much experience and this is your first child. So hiring a tutor who specializes in the 11 plus is absolutely advisable. And what we say is we try to recommend classes that are small. Sure, you might want classes that are large, but of course, the larger the class, the less attention is given to your child. So you want to make sure smaller class sizes. Go to those tutoring classes, see what they are. It might be just go to the first one, see how they are, and actually evaluate, will this work for my child? Is enough time given to each child? And make that because it is an investment you're making. When you are choosing a tutor, you want to make sure that tutor was good for the year, not just for a couple of classes, and then it sort of teeters off. That's the whole topic of tutors is a big thing, and I'm very passionate about that. But I want to make sure I address your question fully, and then make sure you get your child practicing as soon as they start. And definitely use papers, but try and use topic-specific papers. So that means, if your child is struggling with a particular question type, make sure to address that. Don't try to just give them papers which give a mix of questions, and maybe only give, so that if they have a mix of questions, they might only face that particular topic once, maybe even twice a paper. It's not enough time and enough exposure for them to improve, right? So that's, when you are preparing, you need to make sure they have papers that are specific to that particular topic. And finally, make sure you are tracking their progress. Because if you don't track it, you don't know how they're improving. So that means tracking their time, but right at the start of your journey, I wouldn't advise tracking time. Like I said, technique over speed. Speed will come as they're getting better. So start off with focusing on how many questions they're getting right, as well as which questions they're getting wrong and why. If your child doesn't understand a question, they will say they don't understand, but there are many reasons for not understanding a question, right? So they didn't understand what the question was asking, or how to tackle it, or how to, they might understand how to do half of it, but not finish it. So there are many, many reasons. And for all of that, children often say, I don't understand the question, right? So you need to get to the root of that. And or from that, you can already tell there's a lot of time investment. And that's, again, where tutors come in, because they will have the time, they will have the understanding on how to get to the root of that. So that's just a brief overview on what you can do right at the start, when you're trying to prepare for the 11 plus.
Amazing. That is super helpful. So what I'm hearing is the big 3 points are: start getting involved with school, start trying to understand like what kind of schools are a good fit and what are not. To invest in quality education, whether that's you providing it with your time or hiring a tutor that is going to give your child individualized and high quality attention and education.
Absolutely.
And the third is focusing on tracking and listening to your child when they say something like, I don't understand, get to the root of it and help them help them figure it out, basically.
Absolutely.
All right. Great. I know we're coming on time for this episode, so I'll just let's kind of like segue into a little more on like why is it worth preparing for the 11 plus exam? Why are people putting themselves through this arduous journey for the glimmer of hope at the end?
I mean, that's the age-old question, isn't it? Why do we do this? Why are parents so focused on the 11 plus? Because when you ask a child, they don't know why. Most of them don't know why you are doing this. They don't understand, why am I doing these tests? Because of course most children don't do it, right? Speaking from personal experience, as well as having spoken to numerous parents and students over the years, I think it's all about that aspiration to do better, right? Private schools and grammar schools which do these 11 plus exams tend to be better funded. And as a result, they have better, resources, unfortunately. But the truth is, they do have better resources and better access to opportunities. Whether that's universities, they tend to do better in the league tables when it comes to universities. But whether it's things like the arts, if your child is interested in the arts or in science or sports, they tend to be better funded. And it's that that aspiration to give your child the best. That's why parents often do this. And if you want to, if your child is interested in sports or grammar or in sports or drama or science, whatever it is, chances are there is a school out there, but usually they're private or grammar schools. And if and to give them that opportunity, they need to take this test, unfortunately. Right? And so if aspiring to be better isn't a crime, but it does require effort, right? And so that's why parents do it. And it's a glimmer of hope. I wouldn't say it's a glimmer. I would say it's a strong downpour of hope, because if you are well prepared, right? If you're well prepared, you do have strong chance of passing this exam and doing well. Yes. So it's all about preparation, right? You can't just walk in and just do the test.
That is very inspirational. Just knowing the fact that, it is the outcome is very controllable. If if you start and your child is able to, learn very quickly, master the concepts, and complete the exam in a timely fashion, that's sort of that's sort of your ticket, right? To get
Mm-hmm.
into one of these selective schools. As someone who went to one of these selective schools, what was your experience? Do you think for students it's worth it, like that they will get something very powerful out of this experience?
If I have to be candid, and I hope to be candid with my with anyone listening, I would say when I was in the school, I didn't appreciate it enough because you don't know, you know, until you sort of see other schools and hear about other schools. But having come out of it, I realized how fortunate I am, or even growing up through it, really. But at the start, when I was doing the 11 plus, I didn't appreciate it enough. But going to open days really opened my eyes as well at the stark differences in the opportunities and interest. So if you're, like I said, if whatever you're interested in, there is a strong chance that there is a school out there for your child. And they focus, and of course, all of these schools focus on academics as well. It's not all play. They don't just say, oh, you can, you're in the school now, you can just go and play. No, no, no. They do focus on academics. They do make sure your child is working hard. They do challenge your child. So if your child, and this is a very common complaint from my students, if your child is someone who doesn't get challenged in their school, this is a really, really good opportunity for them, because if they're not being challenged, they're not learning.
Wow.
So that's really what we want to do.
Absolutely. Something that also kind of stands out from some of the research that I was doing is, by attending these secondary schools, especially as the world becomes more competitive, these schools seem to do a really great job of preparing students to enter Russell Group colleges, some of the best colleges in the UK, in the US, all over the world. These students are really going on to do really great things because their imagination, creativity, their intellectual horsepower is really fostered from a young age with these schools. And it seems like an investment in the preparation to attend one of these schools is really worth it from a lifetime perspective. So, I can
Yeah.
see that firsthand with you.
Oh, thank
And
you.
and a lot of the students that you've taught as well.
No, absolutely. It definitely gives them, the typical phrase that we often hear is a well-rounded individual, and it really is true. You know, they they sort of do force you into a lot of things that are outside of your comfort zones, and that you normally wouldn't expect to do. And at the time, you don't really think, oh, how does this, relate to my academic ability? But it really does, because it makes you more open to the world and open to things that you probably wouldn't have considered. And so that's, again, yeah, wonderful point. They do really well with Russell Group universities, with universities abroad, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Singapore, whether it's the US. All sorts of schools often value students who have gone to these 11 plus selective schools.
Amazing. We will
Yeah.
definitely be talking a lot more about schools in our next episode. Um, but thank you so much, Ken, for all of your knowledge and sharing everything that you have today. So today, again, just to recap, we covered an overview of the 11 plus exam, kind of the actionable tips that you can start taking as a parent, no matter what grade or what year of preparation your child is in, and why the 11 plus is an important exam. Next week, we will be talking more about things like what schools exist, what are the different types of schools that you can aim for, what strategies should you have when it comes to choosing schools and putting together your list, and when should you start that. So make sure you join us. And please leave any comments, questions, anything you have. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave them right in the comments below. But if you are listening on our podcast, we will post more information about where you can contact us and post your questions. Until then, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.